The shot hit me before I heard it. Coming. That is the thing about plasma fire from a dretch suppression cannon. It does not whistle, it does not crack, it simply arrives, and then whatever it touched is either gone or screaming. I was not gone, I was not screaming either, though. I will admit the first 2 seconds came close to changing that. The bolt caught my left shoulder at an angle, burned straight through the outer layer of my combat suit, and left me face down in a field of black crystal shards on a moon I had never asked to visit. My name is Mara Voss. I am a sergeant in the 7th Human Expeditionary Corps. I am 24 years old. I grew up in northern Yorkshire, where the winters try to end you every single year and never quite manage it. And in that moment, lying flat on a glass land plane under a sky the color of a fading bruise, I had one clear thought: this is going to leave a mark. The crystal field on Cathara 4 is not like any terrain I trained on. Back home we practiced in mud, in sand, in the dense pine forests of the Scottish Highlands. Nobody prepared me for a surface made entirely of obsidian shards, the size of dinner plates, all of them angled upward like the ground itself had decided to grow teeth. Every time I moved, something new cut into me. My suit was designed for it mostly, but the plasma bolt had burned a hole the size of my fist through the left shoulder panel, and now the cold of this moon was coming in along with everything else. I could hear Commander Ali on the comm channel. His voice had that high, rapid quality it got when he was frightened, a sort of compressed whistle that the translation unit in my earpiece turned into words just fast enough for me to follow. The human unit is down. All Valsari forward elements begin staged withdrawal to the secondary ridge. We cannot hold this line. I want to be fair to Ali. He had watched 3 of his own people die in the 60 seconds before that shot hit me. The dretch suppression cannon had taken them apart with a precision that suggested it was not their first time doing this. The Valsari are extraordinary beings. They are tall and fast, and they think about 5 times faster than I do in almost every measurable way, but they are built for a world where nothing much tries to hurt them. Their bones are light, their bodies are optimized for intelligence and speed, not for endurance. One direct plasma hit and a Valsari soldier does not have to worry about leaving a mark, because there is nothing left to mark. Ali had every reason to believe I was dead. I heard the sound of movement behind me, the careful, quick step pattern of Valsari soldiers pulling back. I heard the cannon fire again, further along the ridge, looking for new targets. I heard the dretch communications burst that my suit picked up and flagged as a targeting update. They were swinging the cannon left toward the secondary position. My shoulder felt like someone had pressed a hot iron against it and left it there. The suit had already triggered its emergency sealant layer, which meant the wound was packed with a foam compound that stopped the bleeding and also felt absolutely terrible. There is a reason soldiers call the sealant foam the second injury. It does its job, and it does not apologize for any of the discomfort involved in doing it. I pressed my right hand flat against the crystal and pushed, getting up from a hard drop on a surface of razor edges is not graceful. I am not going to pretend otherwise. I got my knee under me, then my foot, and I stood up in a way that involved considerably more effort than I would have liked, with my shoulder sending very clear signals that I should reconsider. I did not reconsider. I have never found reconsidering to be especially useful in the middle of a situation. The dredge emplacement was on the ridge directly ahead, 3 positions built into a natural fold of the crystal formation, each one housing a cannon and a crew of 2 dredge soldiers. They were maybe 300 out. The crystal flats between us offered almost no cover except for a series of low ridges running perpendicular to my direction, the kind of thing you would barely notice in normal terrain, but here on this flat and brutally open moon looked like the most valuable real estate in the universe. Behind me, the Velsari line was collapsing. I could also hear Ailey's calm burst getting more and more urgent as the secondary position started taking fire. I picked up my weapon with my right hand. I want to be clear about something, because I think it matters. I did not feel brave in that moment. Brave implies a choice between doing the sensible thing and the other thing. I did not experience it as a choice. I looked at the emplacement, I looked at the distance, I looked at the ridge lines, and I started moving forward because that was the only direction that made any sense. The emplacement was the problem. The emplacement needed to stop. I was the only one in a position to do anything about the emplacement. The logic was not complicated. My boot crunched on the crystal surface and I moved at a low angle toward the first ridge line, keeping my profile as small as I could, which is not easy when you are 5'9" and built the way people from my part of the world tend to be built. I am not a small person. My grandfather used to say our family was made for weather, meaning we were broad and solid and not easily moved. I took that as a compliment. It seemed relevant now. I reached the first ridge without being seen. I pressed my back against it and took 3 breaths and assessed what I could see from the new position. One of the dredge crews had the cannon tracking left just as I expected. The second crew was stationary, watching the direction. The Velsari had retreated. The third crew was the one that had shot me, and they were scanning the forward field, looking for movement. They were not looking at me because they had seen me fall and concluded the problem was solved. That is the thing about being from Earth. Other species in this conflict had read a file on us. Some of them, the file was apparently not very good. I checked the charge on my weapon, took a slow breath, and started moving. Again, Ali had not stopped talking on the comm. The Velsari's second position was taking serious fire now. He was calling for a full retreat, trying to organize something, keeping his voice controlled in that way that told me he was more afraid than he was letting on. I did not keep my calm. Talking takes attention I needed elsewhere. I would check in when there was something useful to say. The second ridge was a longer run, about 40 m of open ground with nothing between me and the cannon crews except distance and the hope that they were looking somewhere else. I counted the rotation cycle of the main cannon, the sweep it made every time it finished a burst, and I moved on the down cycle, covering the 40 m in a low, fast run that cost me considerably in terms of what my shoulder thought about being moved quickly. I made it. I pressed flat against the new ridge and listened. The Dreth do not speak in a frequency that translates naturally. My unit had a basic signal decoder, but complex communication came through as tone and rhythm more than words. What I could Here from the nearest emplacement was two voices, quick and steady, the kind of back and forth that sounds the same in every language in the universe when two people are working a weapon under pressure. I was close enough now to smell the heat off the cannon housing. 300 had become 20. Ali's voice crackled in my earpiece. Unit's secondary position is compromised. Withdraw to tertiary. I repeat, withdraw to. I came around the side of the ridge. Nearest Dreth crew saw me at the same moment. I saw them. I will not describe the Dreth in terms that make them seem small, because they are not small. They are larger than humans in most dimensions, armored in a natural chitin that covers most of their body, and they move with the kind of mechanical efficiency that comes from being the apex predators of their own world. For a very long time, the one closest to me was twice my mass and had been operating a plasma cannon for what I guessed was several hours without rest. None of that changed the math of the next 4 seconds. What people misunderstand about humans is that we are not actually the strongest species in the galaxy, or the fastest, or the most intelligent, or the best armored. We are none of those things individually. What we are is a species that has been doing dangerous things in close quarters with large, hostile creatures since before we had language to describe the experience, and somewhere in that long process, we stopped being afraid of things just because they were bigger than us. Fear still works in us. It works fine, but it does not shut us down the way it shuts down species that evolved in safer places. We feel it and we move anyway. That is the difference. It is not heroism, it is just wiring. The Dretch soldier reached for its sidearm. I was already inside the reach that mattered. I will not linger on the details of what happened in those next few seconds, because this is not a story about methods, it is a story about outcomes. What I will say is that the emplacement went quiet, and then I picked up the cannon crew's own weapon from the ground where it had landed, and I moved to the second position. The second crew heard me coming. They had time to turn. They did not have time to do much else. The third crew was further along the ridge. They had more warning. I saw the moment the gunner registered what had happened to positions 1 and 2. The way it went still for a half second in that way living things do when they understand something unexpected and terrible. That half second was enough. The cannon was still warm in my hands when the last sound died. I stood on the ridge and looked out at the glassland plain. The moon star was low on the horizon, throwing long shadows across the black crystal. Everything was completely quiet, even the wind, which had been a constant thin howl since we landed, seemed to have stopped. I keyed my comm emplacements. Clear, all 3 positions down. Does someone want to push the line forward? Or are we just going to stand here? There was a silence on the channel that lasted long enough to be interesting. Then Ali's voice came through, and for the first time since I had known him, he sounded like he had genuinely forgotten what he meant to say next. Nobody moved for a full minute. I counted it on the internal timer in my earpiece. 60 seconds of complete stillness on a channel that had been churning with noise and crisis for the past hour. The Velsari soldiers on the secondary line had stopped withdrawing. I could see 2 of them at the far edge of the ridge, their long silhouettes absolutely motionless against the pale sky, looking in my direction. I understood the pause. I did not need them to explain it, I had just done something that should not have been possible, and they were doing what intelligent creatures do when reality stops cooperating with their expectations. They were catching up. Sergeant Voss, Ailey's voice was carefully measured, each word placed with the precision of someone who is controlling something strong inside themselves. Please confirm your status. Operational, I said. Left shoulder needs attention. Everything else is functional. Another pause. You were struck by a direct suppression burst? Yes, from a Class 4 Durath cannon, if you say so. I did not stop to ask the model number. Sergeant, he stopped, started again. We observed the impact at that range. With that weapon, the result is not compatible with continued function for any species in this theater. I looked down at my shoulder. The sealant foam had done its work. The suit's internal temperature was evening out now that I had moved enough to get my circulation working properly. Again, the wound hurt the way a serious burn hurts, which is to say it hurt a great deal and would continue to do so. But the signals my body was sending me were discomfort signals, not shut down signals. There is a difference, and I have had enough years of the first kind to know what the second kind feels like, which is how I know I had not crossed into it yet. Commander, I said, line is open. I recommend we take it before the Durath regroup. He gave the order not because he fully understood what had just happened. I do not think he did, not yet. He gave it because he was a good commander, which means he understood that useful information arriving at the right moment is more valuable than a complete understanding of where it came from. The Velsari line moved forward. I walked back through the crystal field to meet them, and somewhere in the middle of that walk, carrying a captured weapon in one hand and favoring my right side more than I wanted to admit, I passed the spot where I had fallen 23 seconds before. The crystal shards there were scorched in a wide circle from the plasma impact. They were still faintly warm when I stepped over them. I kept walking. The field medic who reached me first was a Velsari named Suval. She was the kind of person who remained calm in a crisis by focusing very hard on observable facts, which I respected. The first observable fact she encountered when she reached me was a human with a plasma wound that should have been fatal, standing upright and completing a 300 walk into her own power. She did not say anything for a moment. She ran her scanner over me with the careful focus of someone who wants to make sure the instrument is working correctly before they trust the reading. You are bleeding, she said, in 3 separate places. I know. The primary wound covers approximately 11 cm of tissue destruction across the deltoid region. I know that too. The sealant compound appears to have taken effect. She tilted her head at a slight angle, which in Velsari body language indicates careful thought rather than confusion. Your cellular response to the compound is faster than the standard projection. Is it going to be a problem? No. The healing trajectory is. She paused again, and I saw her look at her scanner with the expression of someone who has done the math twice and gotten the same unlikely answer both times. Accelerated, she finished. Significantly. I sat down on a flat section of crystal because my leg was starting to tell me things I did not want to hear while standing up. The thigh wound was the one she had not mentioned yet. I had collected that one on the run to the Second position, a grazing hit from the second crew's side arm that had gone through the suit at the lower thigh end. Made itself known more insistently with every step since. The shoulder was the headline, the thigh was the running commentary. Can you stabilize both? I asked. Yes, she was already working her hands precise and quick in the way Velsari hands always are. I want to note, Sergeant, that this is not a normal injury profile, I know. The volume of tissue damage sustained, combined with the continued operation of the injured individual, is outside any parameter I have trained for. I looked at the horizon, where the Velsari line was moving forward across the crystal flats, taking the ground the Dretch had held 10 minutes ago. Ollie was out there organizing, directing, doing what commanders do. I could see his silhouette, taller than the others, moving quickly. Where I come from, I said, we have winters that last 6 months. We have oceans that will drown you in 4 minutes if the water is cold enough. We have creatures on land and in the sea that have been trying to eat us since before we knew how to make fire. We grew up on a planet that treated us like a problem to be solved. I looked at Soval. We never got solved. We got irritated. There is a difference. She was quiet for a moment, still working on my shoulder with the kind of focus that suggests a person is processing more than they are showing. I have read a summary of the human Xenophil, she said finally. What did it say? That humans are a mid-tier biological species from a Class 3 world with high adaptability ratings and unusual psychological resilience scores. She applied a secondary dressing with careful pressure. It did not say this. Most files on us don't, I said. We have not been in the Confederacy long enough for anyone to update them properly. I will be updating mine. Personally, I almost smiled. I would appreciate that. Ollie arrived 10 minutes later, after the forward line had secured the new position and the immediate crisis had shifted from survival to consolidation. He walked across the crystal field toward me with a deliberate pace that told me he had decided something and was going to say it carefully. His chromatophores, the color cells in his skin that Velsari used to express what their faces do not, were cycling through a sequence I had never seen on him before. I had learned to read a few of his basic states over the past weeks of working together. Focused was a deep blue-green. Concerned was a warm amber. The color he was wearing now was something in between those and several other shades I did not have names for. He stopped in front of me. He looked at me the way you look at something when you are trying to reconcile what you expected with what you are seeing. I called a retreat, he said. I heard you. I was certain you were dead. I understand why. Sergeant Voss, he paused. He was choosing his words with the kind of care that his species applies to things that matter. What are you? It is a strange question the first time someone asks it in total sincerity. Not what species, not what unit, not what rank. What are you? Like the category itself needs to be established before anything else can follow. I am a human, I said, from a planet called Earth in a system your charts probably list as Sol. I know what humans are designated as, he said. I am asking what you are. I understood what he meant. I just took a moment to think about how to answer it. Honestly, we are the species that stayed, I said. At last, our world tried very hard to make us leave or die. We did neither. We stayed, and we learned every way the world tried to end us, and then we found ways around each one, and when we ran out of things on our own world to survive, we built ships and came out. Here, I shifted my weight, and my shoulder reminded me it had opinions. About that, we are not the strongest thing in this galaxy, Commander. We are probably not even close, but we are the thing that grew up on a world where being the strongest was never an option. So we learned to be something else. Instead, what did you learn to be? He asked. I thought about Yorkshire winters, about the North Sea in January, about every piece of training I had done. In rain so heavy it felt personal. Difficult to stop, I said. He looked at me for a long moment. His chromatophores settled into a color I had not seen on him before. It was quiet and steady and deep, like water in a very old well. The Dareth have never retreated from a position they established, he said, in 32 systems across 11 years of conflict. They have never once retreated from a position they fortified. He paused. They are pulling back from this moon. Our forward scouts have confirmed it in the last 5 minutes. I looked out at the crystal plain. Good, I said. You understand what that means? It means they encountered something they did not have a category for, I said, and until they build the category, they are going to be cautious. That is sensible. I would do the same. Lee was quiet for a moment. Then, unexpectedly, he asked, are you in pain right now? Yes, I said, quite a lot. And you are simply continuing anyway, I said. Yes. He looked at me with that unreadable combination of colors, and then he did something I had never seen a Velshari do. In the presence of a human, he bowed his head, not a formal gesture, not a military one, the slow, deliberate kind. That means something personal. You gave us the line, he said quietly. You gave me the mission, I said. We are even. He straightened up. His commander's face came back on, the focused blue-green, settling back into place, the decision maker reasserting himself. Can you walk? I have been walking. Can you walk further? I tested my leg. My thigh told me its opinion. I told my thigh to be patient. Yes, then walk with me, he said. There are things I need to show the forward command, and I find I would like you present. I stood up. Suville made a small sound of professional displeasure at the speed with which I did it, and I appreciated her concern, and I stood up anyway. We walked together across the glass land, the commander and the human sergeant, while the Velshari line finished taking the ground the Dread had abandoned, and the moon's pale star climbed higher in the bruised sky. Nobody fired at us. Nobody was going to fire at us for the remainder of that engagement, because the Dread, for the first time in 11 years, of doing exactly as they pleased across 32 star systems, had decided they needed more information before continuing. We had given them something to think about. That, as much as anything else, felt like a victory. The after-action tent went up on the eastern side of the crystal plain, in the lee of the largest ridge formation. The wind dropped to something manageable. It was a Velshari standard field shelter, which meant it was tall enough for Ollie to stand upright in, wide enough for a command table, a medical station, and a comms array that Suville had already been using to file preliminary reports with the Confederacy. Rear command. I sat at the table with a ration pack in my good hand and a field dressing on my shoulder and listen to the world. Process what had happened, that is the right word for it. Process, the data was. All in, the events were finished, now. The intelligent minds around me were working through the material, turning it over, looking for the framework that would make it fit into something comprehensible. I had been through this before in smaller ways, on smaller stages. I knew the feeling. It is the moment after something outside normal experience occurs, when the people who witnessed it start the long, careful work of deciding what it means. Ollie's first action after we reached the forward command position was to pull up the full Confederacy Xenophil on human beings. I know this because he told me he was going to, and because he asked me to stay while he read it, and because the expression on his face as he read it was an education in itself. The file took him about 4 minutes to go through at Velsha reading speed, which meant it was not a short document. At various points, he stopped and looked at me over the top of the display surface with the expression of a person encountering significant new information in real time. About halfway through, he set the display down and looked at me with absolute seriousness. Your average bone density is listed here as 40% above Velshari standard. I would not know the exact number, I said, but roughly, probably. The document includes a notation that this density is not evenly distributed. It is higher in the skull, the forearms, the upper spine, also roughly accurate. That is not an accident of biology. No, I said, it is what happens when your ancestors spend several 100,000 years in close contact with things that want to break those specific bones. He looked at me steadily. The pain tolerance section has a notation that reads upper range uncharted. Who wrote the file? A Confederate xenobiological survey team. Approximately 30 years ago. They may not have had a large enough sample, I said. We tend to underreport in survey conditions, some cultural habit about not making a fuss. Ollie set the display aside entirely. He looked at me the way a person looks at something they genuinely were not prepared to encounter and are now trying to accommodate into their understanding of the world. I owe you an apology, he said. I was genuinely surprised. For what? I called the retreat, he said. I assumed you were beyond recovery. I was preparing to abandon a position that you were already moving to address. He paused. I left you. You did not. No, I said. I should have asked, he said. Before today, I treated your presence in my unit as a logistical convenience. The Confederacy needed warm bodies, and the human core provided them. I read the cover summary of your species profile and filed it under standard auxiliary infantry with minor biological variants. His chromatophores shifted to a warm, steady amber that I had learned to associate with honesty. That was not merely incorrect, it was negligent. I looked at my ration pack for a moment. I thought about how to say what I wanted to say without making it into something bigger than it needed to be. Commander, I said, every species in the Confederacy has files on every other species. Most of those files were written by someone who spent a few weeks on a survey mission and then went home and wrote up their findings from memory. They are not accurate. They are not meant to be accurate. They are meant to be enough to put a label on something so the bureaucracy can file it properly. I looked at him. Humans are listed as a Mid-tier biological species, correct. Taxonomy, wrong conclusion, we are. Mid-tier in almost every individual category, we are something else entirely. When you put all those mid-tier traits together and add the thing the file does. Not measure. What does it not measure? He asked. What we decide to do, I said. There is a note in that file about human psychological response to mortal threat. I have read it. It says our aggression patterns under lethal conditions are counterintuitive, and the reason is unknown. I shrugged with my good shoulder. The reason is not unknown. The reason is that we made a long time ago on a world that was trying to end us, a decision about what kind of species we were going to be. We decided we were not going to be the kind that stops. That decision is not in the file. Ali was quiet for a long time. The command tent was quiet too. The comms array cycling through its standard traffic. Suval working at the medical station. 2 Velsari junior officers at the far end pretending very hard to be focused on something other than our conversation. Finally Ali said, when I asked you earlier what you were, you said you were difficult to stop. Yes, I want to amend that characterization, he said, based on observation. Go ahead. I think you are the most dangerous thing I have ever encountered, he said. It was not an accusation. It was not a compliment exactly either. It was a simple statement of assessment from a very intelligent person who had been doing careful thinking and had arrived at a conclusion. I considered it for a moment. We are also very good at baking bread. I said, I think it is important to be balanced about these things. He looked at me for a moment, then something happened in his expression that I had never seen in a Velsari face before, a slight involuntary shift at the corners of his eyes. The Velsari do not smile the way humans do, but they have an equivalent, and I had never been on the receiving end of one before. I will include that in my updated file. He said, please do. Suval appeared at my shoulder, which is to say she reappeared at a polite distance and waited to be acknowledged. I turned. She had her scanner in hand and an expression of professional determination. The thigh wound needs a secondary treatment, she said, and I would like to take a full biological scan for my own records with your permission. Is it going to take long, given the rate at which your body is processing the initial treatment? It may need to be updated 3 or 4 times over the next 48 hours anyway. I gave her my permission. She worked quickly and precisely, and while she worked she asked questions, not personal ones, medical ones, in the careful way of a scientist who has found a subject she cannot explain and is determined to understand it. How long had it taken my kind to evolve? The current bone density, did I experience the sealant compound differently from the standard projection? Had I sustained comparable injuries in training or prior deployment? Were there genetic variables within humans, or was this profile relatively consistent across the species? I answered what I could. I told her that human variation was significant and that I was probably not an outlier, just a specific expression of a broad range. I told her that the healing rate varied between individuals and that some humans healed faster than me and some slower. I told her that the pain tolerance was largely trained rather than purely innate, that we taught each other to keep going, that the culture of it was as much a factor as the biology. She Listen to all of it with the focus of someone taking the most important notes of her life. I want to ask you something, she said. At a pause in the scanning, and I recognize it may be a strange question. I have been getting a lot of those. Today, I said, go ahead. Do you want to be here? She asked. Not here on Cathara, IV specifically. Here in this conflict, fighting alongside species you have known for less than 2 years on moons and planets that are not yours for reasons that are not directly your own. I thought about it honestly because she deserved an honest answer. Yes, I said, and no, and both at the same time, which is probably the most accurate. Explain to both, she said. We are new to this galaxy in the sense that we have only been reaching other star systems for a short time, and we came out here mostly curious, mostly looking for what else exists, mostly hoping to find something worth knowing. I watched her scanner move. What we found was this, a galaxy where species have been fighting each other for territory and resources and ideology since before Earth had its first ice age, and we found species like the Dreth, which take what they want and break what they cannot take and do not appear to have any interest in stopping. I paused. We do not like that. We are not built for standing by. We see something that needs doing and someone who needs help, and we want to help. It is a problem sometimes, but it is also what we are. You said you did not know why you were here, Suval said, but that sounds very much like a reason. It is not the whole reason, I said. The whole reason is messier than that. Some of it is politics and alliance agreements and Earth's government deciding that full Confederacy membership required a military contribution. Some of it is individual soldiers who signed up because they needed a job or an adventure or a way out of something back home. The reasons are not clean. I looked at her, but underneath all the messy individual reasons, there is something consistent. We are here because when something is wrong, we cannot comfortably stay home and let it be wrong. That part is consistent. Suval was quiet for a moment. She finished the scan and recorded her notes with the focused efficiency she brought to everything. My preliminary biological assessment of your recovery trajectory, she said, finally is going to require an entirely new framework to write. Everything I would normally reference is calibrated for species whose bodies behave in a manner more consistent with their observable damage profile. I know, I said. I am sorry if that makes the paperwork complicated. It does not make it complicated, she said. It makes it the most interesting document I will ever write. She put her scanner away. Get some rest, Sergeant. Your body is working hard, even if you cannot feel all of it. I told her I would. She looked at me as she turned to leave with the expression of a scientist who has just discovered that the most significant discovery of her career arrived wearing a field suit and eating a protein ration. You are a remarkable species, she said, not in the way people say it when they mean strange, in the way they say it when they mean they are genuinely glad something exists. We think so, too, I said. Most days. The transmission came in on the 3rd day. I was in the medical bay, which was the section of the forward command tent that Suval had claimed for her instruments and her extraordinary quantity of notes, when Ali came in with a data chip and an expression I had learned to read by now. It was the expression he wore when something had confirmed what he already suspected, and the confirmation was worse than he had hoped. He set the chip on the table. He looked at me for a moment, then he said, "I want you to read something." The data chip contained a Dreth military transmission. His signals team had intercepted it during the previous night's activity, flagged it as high priority, and run it through the Confederate translation protocol. The result was a document in standard Confederate common script, which I could read. I read it. The Dreth military produces after-action reports in the way bureaucracies the galaxy overproduce after-action reports, which is to say, in dry, formal language, that works very hard to make catastrophic failures sound like data points. The report from Cathara 4 was no exception. It described the engagement in careful sequence. It noted the suppression line established. It noted the Velsari withdrawal. It noted the anomaly. The anomaly was me. The report described in its clinical and careful way a Confederacy biological unit that sustained 2 direct plasma impacts at ranges with standard lethal parameters and continued active combat operations with observable increase in movement speed and target engagement. It noted that the biological did not exhibit the physiological shutdown response that all catalog species in the active conflict zone demonstrate under equivalent damage conditions. It noted that within 23 seconds of the second plasma impact, all 3 established Dreth forward emplacements were neutralized by the anomalous unit operating independently. The Dreth word that appeared next to my description had a translation footnote. The Confederate linguists had worked on it for several hours. Their best rendering was something between still moving after death and the thing that did not stop. They had not settled on a single translation because the Dreth had apparently coined the term in real time. The report's recommendation section began with a single line that the translation team had flagged as the most significant finding. We have no existing file on humans. We do not know what we engaged. We do not know if this individual is representative of the species or an exceptional case. We do not know the upper parameters of their biological resilience. We do not know their pain threshold, their endurance limit, or the conditions under which they cease to function. We recommend full withdrawal from the Cathara engagement zone pending complete intelligence gathering on the human species profile. Engagement without intelligence is unacceptable risk. I put the document down. Ali was watching me. They do not know what you are, he said. No, I said, they are afraid to engage until they understand the parameters of what they are dealing with. That is sensible, I said. I told you it would be. You did. He sat down across the table, which was unusual for him. Ali did not often sit in my presence unless the situation was explicitly social rather than operational. It meant he was treating what followed as a different kind of conversation. I forwarded this document to Confederate Joint Command this morning. I expected you would. Their response arrived an hour ago. He touched the data chip and a second document appeared on the surface beside the first. I read it while he watched. The Confederate Joint Command response was longer than the Dreth report. It had the tone of an organization that had been handed something it did not entirely know how to categorize and was attempting to do so with appropriate gravity. It noted the significance of the Dreth withdrawal. It noted that in 11 years of conflict, no Dreth withdrawal from a fortified position had previously been recorded. It noted the correlation between that withdrawal and the presence of human military personnel in the engagement zone. Then it said something that made me stop reading for a moment. Preliminary analysis suggests the Dreth withdrawal may be less a tactical repositioning and more an intelligence gathering pause. They are not retreating from the Confederacy, they are retreating from the unknown. The unknown, in this case, is the human military profile which the Dreth appear to have encountered without prior data. If this analysis is correct, the introduction of human units into additional contested engagement zones may have significant strategic value beyond their direct combat contribution. Requestful briefing on human biological parameters and psychological operational profile from the Human Core Command. Priority 1. I set the document down. They want to use us, I said, as a deterrent. They want to understand you first. Ali said carefully, then use you as a deterrent. Yes, I thought about that. The Dreth will figure out our parameters eventually, I said. Whatever fear we have bought is temporary. Once they build their file on us, they will understand what we are and are not capable of, and the advantage goes away. Yes, Ali said. And in the time between now and then, I looked at the two documents side by side, the Dreth report written in fear of the unknown, the Confederate response written in the first cautious recognition that the unknown might be useful. I thought about what it meant to be a species that the galaxy was still learning how to categorize. I thought about how long that window might last. I thought about all the fronts where the Dreth were currently pushing, all the positions where a species that did not know the parameters of the thing coming at them might stop, might pause, might pull back to build their file. The Dreth have never retreated from a fortified position, I said quietly, in 32 systems, 11 years until now. Until now, Ali agreed. One soldier, I said. 23 seconds. Yes. I sat with that for a moment. It was not comfortable exactly. There is something unsettling about being a strategic variable. I had come here as a soldier, with a soldier's relationship to her role, which is immediate and personal, and not especially concerned with the bigger picture until the bigger picture makes itself relevant. The bigger picture had just made itself very relevant. What does Joint Command want from me? Specifically, I asked. They want a statement, he said, your own account of the engagement, in your words, not mine. They want to know what I was thinking, I said, among other things. I thought about what I had been thinking, the crystal plane, the cannon crews, the distance and the ridges and the cycling shot pattern, and the simple, flat logic of the problem is there. I am here. This needs to be addressed. I will tell them the truth, I said, which is that I was not thinking anything very extraordinary. I was thinking about the problem and how to address it. Will they find that reassuring? Ali asked. I considered. Probably not, I said, but it is true. And true is better than reassuring. Usually. Ali nodded slowly. He reached out and closed the documents on the table. Surface, he looked at me with the steady, careful attention of a person who has revised a significant assumption and is still working out all the implications. The Dretch, he said, have a word for humans now, a category they invented in the field because they did not have one. Before I know, I said, I read the footnote, the still moving after death. He said, the thing that did not stop, it is not a bad description, I said. Technically speaking, no, he said, it is not. He stood up and straightened his uniform with the brisk, habitual motion of a military person returning to function after a moment of something personal. I am going to compile the forward command assessment for joint review. Your statement needs to be attached before I send it. Give me an hour, I said. He gave me the hour. I spent it at the edge of the medical bay, writing in plain language what I had done and why, and what I had been thinking and what it had felt like to be hit by a weapon that was designed to be definitive and to find that it was not, at least not for me, at least not this time. I did not dress it up. I did not make it dramatic. I wrote it the way my grandfather would have described a difficult day on a North Sea trawler, which is to say plainly, with the understanding that the difficulty spoke for itself and did not need decoration. When I handed it to Ollie, he read it once, then he read it again. Then he looked up and said simply, "This is going to cause a great deal of discussion in very high places." "Good," I said, "maybe they will update the file." The summons arrived on the 14th day. By that point, the forward command position on Cathara 4 had been formally established as a Confederate-controlled zone. The Dreth had completed their withdrawal to positions 2 systems spinward, and I had been through 4 additional biological assessments at Suval's insistence, each one generating a new set of findings that she described progressively as fascinating, extraordinary, unprecedented, and then simply as requiring an entirely new vocabulary. The shoulder was healing faster than her models projected. The thigh was already at minimal function limitation. She had stopped trying to reconcile this with her existing framework and had started building a new one from the ground up, which she said was the most intellectually exciting project of her career. I told her I was glad to be useful. The summons came from Confederate Joint Command, addressed to me by name and rank, requesting my presence at the primary command station in the Cathara Systems Orbital Hub. The language was formal and polite, and very clearly not optional. Ollie told me he would be accompanying me. He did not explain why. I did not ask. I suspected the explanation would have involved more paperwork than either of us wanted to produce, and the reason was evident enough in the broader situation. The shuttle from the surface to the hub was a Velsari design, which meant the seats were built for beings several inches taller than me and with a different center of gravity, and the window viewports were positioned slightly above where they were comfortable to look through. I spent the journey watching the moon's surface shrink below us, the crystal plains, going from something I could walk across to something that looked like a scattering of dark mirrors, and then to something too small to distinguish at all from space. Cathara 4 looks peaceful. The orbital hub was a Confederate joint facility, which meant it had been built in sections by several different species, working from several different architectural traditions, and the result was the kind of structure that functions perfectly well and looks from the outside like it was designed by a committee that had never met each other. There were Velsari sections with their Characteristic high ceilings and cool lighting. There were sections built by the Arathi, which were low and warm and smelled of something faintly mineral. There were human sections, too, recognizable by the standard proportions and the tendency to put right angles everywhere, which most other species find slightly aggressive for reasons they have difficulty articulating. The conference room where the joint command review was held was in the neutral section at the hub center, which meant it was a compromise of proportions that satisfied nobody completely and offended nobody enough to complain about. 8 command representatives sat around a long table, one from each of the species currently serving in the Confederate military alliance. At the far end of the table, on a holographic display unit, the small, steady image of Earth's Secretary of Military Affairs, a woman named Claire Barnard, who I had never met and who had the expression of someone who had very carefully briefed and was determined not to let it show. I sat down. Ali sat beside me. The joint command representatives looked at me with the range of expressions that 8 different species wear when they are all thinking variations of the same thing and trying to be professionally neutral about it. The review took 2 hours. I gave my account. I answered questions. I was asked by 3 different representatives in 3 different ways to confirm that my response on the crystal plane had been voluntary and intentional rather than the result of some biological anomaly or temporary physiological state. I confirmed it each time: voluntary, intentional, the result of a clear assessment of a problem and a decision about what to do about it. The Arathi representative, a compact and very still individual named Commander Velrith, asked me at one point whether I had believed in the moment that I would survive the engagement with all 3 in placements. I thought about that honestly. I did not think about surviving, I said. I thought about the problem. Surviving is what happens if the problem gets solved correctly. The representative from the Morn species, whose name translated roughly as first voice of the 23rd chain, asked me whether this response was common to all humans or specific to military personnel. Humans vary, I said, but the underlying pattern is consistent. We do not generally stop when stopping seems easier than continuing. That is not specific to soldiers. Soldiers are just a more organized expression of a general tendency. Claire Barnard, from her holographic position at the end of the table, spoke for the first time. She had been listening the whole session with the focused stillness of someone who has heard a great deal of things she already knew and is waiting for the part that matters. Sergeant Voss, she said, this body is considering formally requesting an expanded human military presence across contested engagement zones based in part on the Dreth withdrawal from Cathar 4, which is now the subject of analysis at every level of Confederate command, and in part on the broader strategic assessment of what that withdrawal implies about the value of the human tactical profile in direct engagement scenarios. She paused before. This body makes that decision. I want to ask you personally what you think the implications are for human soldiers deployed in that capacity. I looked at her small, steady image at the end of the table. Secretary Barnard, I said, the Dreth withdrew because they encountered something they did not have data on, and they are intelligent enough to be cautious about things they do not Understand, that caution will not last. They will gather their data, they will build their file on us. When they do, whatever advantage we currently represent as an unknown quantity will be reduced. The question is what we are once the unknown quantity factor is gone. And what are we? She asked. We are exactly what the Xenophil says we are, I said, a mid-tier biological species with high adaptability ratings and unusual psychological resilience scores. None of those individual ratings are exceptional, but the combination of them applied under pressure over time in sustained conflict adds up to something that is harder to stop than the individual parts suggest. I looked at the table. We will not win this by being a mystery. We will contribute by being what we are consistently, and for a long time. Humans are very good at long periods of sustained difficulty. It is possibly our best feature as a species. We stay. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Commander Velreth said, in the careful, deliberate way of the Arafi, we would like to formally offer humanity full Confederacy membership, accelerated to immediate effect, conditional on the initiation of expanded military cooperation. I looked at Claire Barnard. She was not trying to hide the smile. Now we were going to say yes, she said. We were already going to say yes. We appreciate the expedited timeline. They went around the table then, each representative adding their endorsement in the formal language their species used for such things. It took about 15 minutes. Eli sat beside me through all of it without speaking, his chromatophores cycling through a long, slow sequence of colors. I was starting to understand better. Pride was in their satisfaction, something that might have been relief when it was done. The first voice of the 23rd chain looked at me with the wide, luminous eyes of its species and asked, in a tone of genuine inquiry, whether I had anything I wished to say to the assembled body on behalf of humanity. I thought about it. I thought about the crystal plane, the 3 emplacements, the 23 seconds of silence that had followed. I thought about Suville and her extraordinary notes, and Ollie's revised file, and the Dreth report with its coined vocabulary and its fearful caution. I thought about Earth, which I had not seen in 8 months, and the Yorkshire winters, and my grandfather's voice telling me that the weather did not care about your feelings, and neither did the sea, and you went out anyway because the fish were there, and you had a job to do. I am going to relay this offer home, I said, and I am confident we will accept it because humans have never been able to leave something alone when someone needed help, and we have never been very good at watching a problem from a comfortable distance. I paused. I want to say one thing for the record, though, not as a military statement, just as a person. The room waited. Read the file, I said, the actual file, not the summary, the whole thing, and after you read it, update it, ask us questions. Come to Earth if you want to, walk around in our weather and eat our food, and watch how we treat each other on a difficult day, because the things in the file are true as far as they go, but the things that are not in the file are the things that matter most. The reasons, the values, the part where we decided long time ago what kind of species we were going to be. I looked around the table. We are here because we decided to be, not because we had to be. That distinction matters to us. I wanted you to know it. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Ollie beside me said very quietly, "We will read the file." I believed him. I went back to the Crystal Plane one more time before we shipped out. The shuttle schedule was flexible and Ollie had arranged an extra 6 hours before departure, which I suspected was deliberate and did not comment on. I took the hours and I walked out onto the glass land in the late afternoon of Cathara 4's long day when the system star was low and orange and throwing the kind of light that makes even a broken landscape look considered. The crystal shards caught the light and scattered it in 1,000 directions. The obsidian surface that had been so hostile, so sharp, so indifferent to whether I lived or died on it was briefly beautiful, a way that seemed almost intentional. The way all harsh places look briefly beautiful when the light hits them. Right, I have seen it on the North Sea. At sunset, I have seen it in the hills. Above home in the first snow of winter. Some part of the world that spends the rest of its time being difficult agrees for a moment to be stunning. I walked to the spot where I had fallen. The scorched circle in the crystal was still there, darker than the surrounding surface, the shards fused at the edges by the heat of the plasma impact. A clean record of the moment. Something had tried very hard here and something had gotten back up in the ground still. Remembered both things. I stood in the middle of the circle and looked at the ridge where the emplacements had been. They were cleared. Now the Dreth hardware removed or destroyed, the ridge returned to plane. Geology, 3 positions, 3 problems, 23 seconds. It was not a long time. It was apparently long enough. My comm pinged, Ollie's voice easy and measured. Sergeant Voss, we are approaching departure readiness. On my way, I said. I stood for another moment on the scorched crystal. I thought about the 14 days since the engagement, about the meetings and the documents and the political machinery that had been turning ever since, all of it in motion, because of something that had happened here in this specific spot on this specific moon in a window of 23 seconds that I had not planned and had not prepared for and had simply moved through because the situation required it, and I was the one present. I thought about what Claire Barnard had asked me in the review, what we were once the unknown quantity factor was gone. What we were was people who stayed, people who decided in whatever moment required the decision to continue rather than stop, people who came from a world that spent hundreds of thousands of years trying to select that quality out of us because staying is dangerous and continuing has costs, and the world tried every way it knew to teach us that the sensible option was to quit. It never managed it. We never learned to quit. We learned to hurt and keep going. We learned to be afraid and keep going. We learned to be hit by things that should stop us and keep going, not because we did not feel them, but because we had made a decision about what we were going to be, and the decision held even when the feeling said otherwise. That is not a comfortable thing to be. It is a useful thing to be. It is what I had to offer. My comm pinged again, not Ollie this time, a new channel. A signal I recognized as the Confederate Joint Command frequency routing through the hub above. Sergeant Voss, a voice I did not recognize, clear, formal, with the slight translation layer smoothness of someone broadcasting through a standard Confederate comm filter. This is the Joint Command Operations Desk. We have a situation developing at the contested zone on Pelith 2nd. The Dreth have pushed a new line and the local Confederate forces requesting additional support. You have been flagged as the relevant specialist for first contact. Assessment. I looked at the scorched circle around my boots. I thought about Pelith, second, which I had never visited and did not know, and which apparently needed someone to go take a look at what was happening and whether the situation could be addressed. I thought about the long day of this moon settling into its evening, about the shuttle waiting, about the 14 days of politics and procedures and formal reviews that had finally, after considerable effort by a great many important people, resulted in humanity joining the Confederacy. And I thought about the fact that the galaxy was very large and the problems in it were many, and that somewhere out there was a species that had spent 11 years taking what it wanted from anyone who could not stop it, and that the first time they had encountered something they could not categorize, they had paused. The pause would not last, but I was still here. Understood, I said. I will be at the shuttle in 12 minutes. I stepped out of the scorched circle and started walking back toward the landing area. The crystal plane caught the last of the day's light around me, scattering it in 1,000 directions, making the broken ground briefly, improbably beautiful. Ailey was waiting at the edge of the landing area. He saw me coming across the flats and fell into step beside me without a word, which I had come to understand was his way of saying things that did not require words. New deployment, he asked after a moment. Pelith second, I said. He processed that for a few steps. That is a difficult theater. Yes, I said. The Dreth have been fortifying there for 6 months. Yes, I said. He walked beside me in quiet for a moment more. Would you require a support team? He asked. I thought about the emplacements, about the math of situations that need addressing and people who are available to address them, about the Velshari line, which had moved forward when Ailey gave the order and had held the ground and had done its part with intelligence and speed and courage. I always require a support team, said. I do not work well alone. Nobody does. He was quiet again for a moment, then, in a tone that had moved past formal and past careful and was simply direct, I will file for joint deployment if you will have me. I looked at him. His chromatophores were doing something I recognized now, the steady deep color that looked like water in a very old well. I will have you, I said. Obviously, we walked to the shuttle together. The crystal plane lay behind us in the fading light, and the scorched circle that marked where something had tried to be definitive and had not quite managed. It was already out of sight, already becoming just another piece of ground on a moon that would have other things happen on it before it was done. We had other places to be. There were always other places to be. The shuttle lifted, and Cathara 4 fell away below us, and I watched it shrink in the viewport until it was nothing but a dark glint in the light of its own star, and then I turned around and looked at the space ahead, which was very large and had a great many things in it that were about to become aware of what they were dealing with. My shoulder ached in the recycled air of the shuttle cabin. I did not mind. I have learned to take the ache as information. It means something tried. It means it did not succeed. It means I am here and moving, and the work continues, which is the only update that matters at the end of any day on any world under any sky. I am Mara Voss, I am from Earth, I am 24 years old, I'm not done yet, not even close.